Hey, welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. Again, it is the Big Me Kickoff. We don't want to hear from the Fox lawyers, so you can do the math there as to where we are. And it is Rutgers week for the Buckeyes, so they're going back on the road. 3-1 Ohio State going on to take 3-1 Rutgers. It should be an exciting game. We're going to talk a little bit about that here in a second with Bill Bender of the Sporting News, good friend of mine. Bill, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Kevin. How are you?
Doing great. Now, it has been an odd season, but it's been great to have at least more of a normal season back after 2020. I don't think I've ever had to ask, is a game going to take place this week or not? I mean, we certainly saw plenty of interruptions last year, but on the other side, it's an interesting season because I don't know if we have as many teams that are just a cut above everybody else. We certainly have, those top 25 teams. But do we have those top five teams at this point? So a wild year so far.
Yeah, for sure. And there's not that one. Well, Alabama and Georgia have looked probably the closest to a cut above of the unbeaten teams. I mean, Georgia with that defense, Alabama with how Bryce Young has been able to play, and they escaped Florida. But to your point, I mean, yeah, there's hope in other places. There's hope for the Pac-12 to get a playoff berth. There's probably some Big Ten teams that feel like they can take a swing at Ohio State and actually mean it. Not saying they're going to beat them, but Penn State, Iowa, there's probably more hope than usual there. Yeah, it's been crazy with all the upsets and turn of events that have nothing to do with COVID-19, which is the nice part.
When we look at this year so far, Ohio State comes out, opens at Minnesota, a good win, not necessarily a great win, then goes and loses by 7 to an Oregon team that's without Kayvon Thibodeau, that's without Justin Flo. Then comes back, looks okay against Tulsa, and then rolls over a very overmatched Akron team that's not even really a great team by MAC standards. Now Ohio State goes back into Big Ten play. When we talk about where teams are standing, normally under normal circumstances, Ohio State is used to being in that upper cut where you put Alabama, where you put UGA. Ohio State certainly hasn't shown anything at this point this season to deserve to be in that cut. But, what are your thoughts just, from a mile high of what you've seen out of Ohio State?
Well, I still see an elite offense. I mean, they lead the FBS in yards per play, 8.6. They've got playmakers all over the place with Travion Henderson's emergence at running back. You've already got 2 first-round receivers. Jackson Smith-Jigba's looked good. The quarterback question, Stroud, McCord, whoever, they've got all those guys around them. So I think the offense will continue to be elite. And I still stand by you've got to score at least 35 to beat the Buckeyes. Oregon did that. Oregon outflanked them. Oregon outplayed them. Kevin, maybe it's just me and knowing the track record, but I don't think anybody in the Big Ten can beat Ohio State. And I could be wrong. I mean, they could, but I don't think they will, if that makes sense. Penn State's probably the closest thing to it.
And that's what it comes down to. It's the teams that are on your schedule, and a lot of people are ready to sell on Ohio State. Ohio State fans are ready to sell on Ohio State because that's just kind of how it works. But you look at Ohio State's schedule, and you don't see those teams, and they don't have the crossover games this year. They don't have Iowa. They don't have, I've gotten so conditioned into saying Wisconsin, but Wisconsin, I've not really seen them look good any single time that I've watched them play this season. Graham Mertz is not having a memorable season at this point, at least from a good standpoint. So you see Ohio State going to Rutgers, hosting Maryland, and then having the open week before a trip to Bloomington to take on Indiana, an Indiana team that hasn't necessarily put it together yet. But we can get into the bigger picture of Ohio State in a second. What do you see out of Rutgers? I mean, they certainly, I think, have taken some steps forward with the return of Greg Schiano. They're looking more like a Rutgers team the first go around of Greg Schiano. But, I still think it's a team that doesn't necessarily have the roster to be able to do everything that fans in New Jersey are hoping to see out of the Scarlet Knights.
Well, Greg Schiano can still coach defense. He did a good job of that last week. I mean, I know they got behind early to Michigan, but the adjustments they made, I think they forced 4 or 5 straight three and outs and made a game of it in Ann Arbor that looked like it was going to be a runaway early by stopping the run. Noah Vidal at quarterback, he's okay. I mean, he can run that offense. They do have a couple decent playmakers like Pacheco that Ohio State's going to have to keep an eye on. But if you're looking at this from the Ohio State angle, it has to be continued improvement on the defensive side of the ball, not giving up chunk plays, continuing to generate the pass rush that they did with the front four last week that led to, was it 8 sacks? I think it was 8. Yeah, and building off that, because like I said, the good news for Ohio State is this part of the schedule can be used to build and ramp up towards what's going to be at least an interesting November against an improved Michigan State team, an improved Penn State team. And yeah, Michigan's better. I mean, we're going to find out how good Michigan is when they go to Wisconsin this weekend and a place where they haven't won since 2001.
So I'm going to be really curious to see some of these other Big Ten games for sure. We'll talk about that in a minute as well here on the Big Me Kickoff. So Ohio State can put up points. Ohio State's defense is still trying to figure it out. What do you think that, the line in this game has always been ginormous? It's 2 touchdowns with a couple, maybe 15 at this point for Ohio State. Ohio State has never had the game closer than, I think, 22 points. What is it that Ohio State fans should fear most about Rutgers? I mean, you do talk about Isaiah Pacheco. I mean, they've got, it's a senior-led team. There are a lot of guys there. I think they've got a lot of super seniors on this roster. I think if I remember from my counting on defense, it's 8 seniors, 2 juniors, and a freshman out there. What stands out most?
I think like I said, the adjustments on defense, that they don't give up a ton. They only give up 4.4 yards per play. So that says that over these games, even with Michigan on there, that they haven't given up a ton of big plays. They're decent up front. And that front seven, maybe it poses Ohio State challenge. I don't think it will. But again, when you get into, like you said, this game where you said it earlier, we're conditioned to think, and I'm just conditioned to think that Ohio State goes out to Piscataway and blows them out. And maybe it won't be that way. Maybe Schiano gets them up and it's a game into the third quarter at least before Ohio State pulls away. But I still think that confidence built from what they've seen in Henderson. The quarterback situation obviously remains up in the air, but what they've had with those things, I think Ohio State's going to roll in this one and go on to a pretty big win.
I'm looking at the Big Ten schedule here, and there are a couple of games that maybe at the start of the season we would be like, these are going to be just epic, titanic struggles, and maybe there's not as much shine on those, on those as now. But what game are you most interested in? And the 2 that jump off the page to me is Michigan at Wisconsin and Indiana at Penn State. I mean, sorry, Charlotte at Illinois. Sorry, Western Kentucky at Michigan State. But those are the 2 games that I'm most interested in seeing. I mean, there's some interesting trends in that Michigan-Wisconsin game. Jim Harbaugh's record as an underdog versus Wisconsin's record against teams ranked, at a certain point of the rankings. Which one are you most interested in seeing?
Oh, that one for sure, because obviously Wisconsin, for all they've had go wrong in the first month of the season, they've got arguably the best run defense in the country, and Michigan has a very good rushing attack with 3 good running backs. So I think it's going to come down to the quarterbacks in this one, and Graham Mertz and Cade McNamara, and which one of those 2 can A, not mess it up, and B, maybe make a huge third down conversion or 2 in the clutch and win a close game. I think it will be close. The last 2 trips Michigan's made there, they've been blowouts and they've been ugly. And if Wisconsin does blow them out, we're gonna have another round of Jim Harbaugh, like you said, can't win as an underdog. This is more of a pick'em to me. But looking back at that 2001 win that Michigan had, it was on a last-second field goal, and I think this one's going to be tight as well. But the Wolverines get through it.
We'll jump to the other game, the Indiana at Penn State game. I mean, Penn State certainly is taking care of what it needs to take care of, but unable really to run the ball with great consistency, whereas Indiana hasn't found the success with Michael Penix Jr. that it's had in previous years. I mean, Penix has been a very streaky quarterback. Unfortunately for Ohio State last year, he was heating up that streak when they played. Let's not forget the 2020 game that came down to the dive into the end zone and everything else in the Indiana-Penn State game. Just, how amped up do you think Penn State's going to be looking after probably feeling that it kind of got shorted by the refs there?
Oh, I had a ton of motivation for them. And Penn State's starting, like I mentioned earlier, starting to get that kind of feel that that's the team that maybe can challenge the Buckeyes. I'm not saying they're going to win, but they'll definitely go into Columbus and maybe be able to challenge them if Sean Clifford continues to play the way that he has, coming off a 400-yard, 4-touchdown game. Got one of the best receivers in the conference in Jahan Dotson. You mentioned their running game struggles. That's kind of the missing piece on offense, and they're going to need to get that going against a pretty tough Indiana front. I do think the motivation of last year's loss, the way that Michael Penix Jr. got to the pylon, and Penn State's season really went off the rails after that. They lost 5 straight games. Will be the motivation. I like the Nittany Lions to take care of business here. Indiana just doesn't look the same as that feel-good story that they were last year.
My sneaky good game for the Big Ten this week is Iowa at Maryland. Maryland's certainly getting some things done on the offensive side of the ball. Iowa's a team that I think that anybody who's at least out of Central Ohio and just watches Big Ten East, they never really know. They just know that Kirk Ferentz is generally going to have his team ready for these types of games. If this game were in Iowa City, I wouldn't even have it on my radar, but could Maryland pull the upset?
They can. I don't know if they will, but I like what they have with Talia Tagovailoa at quarterback. He's been brilliant early in the season. They did beat West Virginia. That was a game I didn't think they'd win either. But they did get that one done in their home. Big Friday night spotlight for them. And I want to, we all know Iowa's defense is really good right now. Creates turnovers, stops the run, does all the things that fundamental, really good Kirk Ferentz team will do. And they've got an awesome center in Tyler Linderbaum, who's really gone viral with these. Every week it seems like there's a tweet out there of him just mauling people. But I kind of want to see Iowa get in a situation where maybe Maryland scores first and jumps out to a 7 or 10-point lead. And how does that offense respond? And I think that's something to watch if Maryland's able to get off to a fast start, maybe score a quick hit or touchdown, to see how the Hawkeyes look. I think we all feel like they deserve to be a top 5 team, but are they really a top 5 team? And I guess that's the big question with the Hawkeyes.
We're going to jump to the national picture as Bill Bender of the Sporting News joins us. Who is in better position to pull off the upset this week? Arkansas facing Georgia or Ole Miss facing Alabama?
That's a tough one. That's why I took that deep pause there. I'm trying to, you could justify that Arkansas coming off the 2-week, 3-week stretch that they've done and beating Texas and Texas A&M and looking pretty brilliant doing it. I just don't know if a all or nothing passing game with KJ Jefferson is going to work against that Georgia defense. And it's hard to get up every single week, especially after you beat those Texas opponents. So I think Georgia might be a little too much for them. I think Ole Miss is the better bet to do it, just because Lane Kiffin, no Saban, the offenses could be, this could be a shootout. And Alabama struggles to run the ball a little bit. So I think Lane's going to borrow what Florida did, hope that Matt Corral doesn't turn the ball over, get the running game like they did last year, and at the end of the day, pray a little bit because it's still Alabama. It's still tough to beat. But if I had to pick one to lose, I'd probably pick Ole Miss to beat Alabama.
Then we can talk about the Brian Kelly Bowl, Cincinnati, Notre Dame. Brian Kelly started at Cincinnati before going to Notre Dame. Notre Dame's the number 9 team. Cincinnati's the 7 team. Cincinnati's actually, as of the time that we're recording this, a 1.5 point favorite. So what do you see there? I mean, I think we've certainly seen Notre Dame get pushed at some points. The score against Wisconsin was not really indicative of much of that game until Wisconsin fell apart. Cincinnati's just done everything that's been asked of them, but the level of challenge goes up significantly in this one.
Oh, and Luke Fickell talked about it earlier this week and didn't hide or shy away from the fact that this is the biggest game in the program's history in a long time. Well, he didn't say that, but he said it's a big game, and he knows that. And I think it's going to feel like a college football playoff elimination game of sorts. All of the trends, like on the field, favor Cincinnati. I mean, they're favored, and their running game's really effective. Desmond Ritter's an experienced quarterback. Their defense can shut down the run, but Notre Dame just found a way in these games, despite a so-so running game and Jack Cohn getting sacked 5 times a game and all these things that work against it. I think they found something in the fourth quarter against Wisconsin they're going to use and pull out another tight victory. And Kevin, I think they're going to become, as if they're already not to most people, they're really going to be a team that people really start to root against because they could snag somebody's playoff spot with a string of victories just doing what they're doing.
Talking about teams that people don't root for, at least in Ohio State Buckeye Nation, that would be Clemson. BC and Clemson, the game's in Clemson. Clemson is a 14.5-point favorite. That just seems to be a line that is out of whack after watching the game against NC State. Clemson without Brian Brzee now with an ACL. Will Shipley banged up. What do the odds makers know that we don't? Because I'm sure people who are watching this in states with legalized sports gambling are probably getting second and third mortgages to put all the money they can on Jeff Hafley and the Eagles.
Yeah, I have no idea what they're looking at, right? Which means that they're probably right when I feel that way. And I mean, Jeff Hafley obviously has done a phenomenal job. Boston College has offset the injury to Phil Jerkovich with a really strong running game. It's the first time they've been 4-0 since Matt Ryan was there. And Ohio State fans know what Jeff Hafley is all about, the energy he brings to a program and a defense. So it is a bad game to walk into for Clemson if things are still skittish on the offensive end and they're not getting blocks and they're not getting the ball down the field with DJ Uiagalelei, because I think a lot of these ACC teams, and NC State, you could sense it last week, they know that Ohio, it's kind of like Ohio State that 1 year that they struggled with Jim Tressel. I think it was 2005. Like, teams start to sense that, right? And they're not as afraid of Clemson as they normally are.
Exactly. They just don't have this, bulletproof, impervious type of armor around them. So they're going to always get everybody's best shot. But there's one thing about saying, oh, I hope we're going to win versus, okay, we know the path to be able to win. Another, I guess the last of the ranked versus ranked teams is Baylor and Oak State. You have Oak State about a 4-point favorite in that one. I think a lot of people look at this and they see everybody's playing for second in the Big 12. Everybody's behind Oklahoma at this point. Generally it's Oklahoma, Texas. Everything gets set up for the game at the Texas State Fairgrounds. Texas certainly is not. We're back. They're not back yet. Sorry, they're not. But what do you see out of this game? Because so many people want to already cast off conferences at this point, and you really can't. I mean, it's October 1st. You can't be writing off conferences really yet. I mean, people may say that about the ACC with Clemson being down, but Notre Dame may slide into that spot even though they aren't really a conference member. I think everybody thinks that the Big 12 will cannibalize itself. Who takes the step back in here and battle of 4-0 teams?
Well, I like Oklahoma State in this game. And it's going to be a close one. Baylor's really turned it up with their running game as well. They've got 3 or 4 options in there. Tristan Ebner's been very effective. But I like Oklahoma State. I like how they played last week. I think they continue that momentum going. And what you're going to see is, and I like Oklahoma at Kansas State too. So I think you're going to start to see this build up to Bedlam. And Bedlam's going to mean a little more over the next couple years, depending on how long Oklahoma stays in the SEC. So I think that's kind of the trend I'm watching in that conference. Obviously, Oklahoma, the pressure to stay perfect is on because they haven't looked great in their wins. So if the second Oklahoma loses a game, like you said, it's going to be very easy to dismiss the Big 12 from the college football playoff picture. And the team really, and I know it has nothing to do with the Big 12, the team is sitting in the best position as long as they keep winning is Oregon, because they have that back pocket win against Ohio State in hand, and all they have to do is take care of business in a fairly uneven Pac-12.
Exactly, and you did talk about Oklahoma, who's taking on K-State, and it certainly has felt like through the years, recent years, K-State has had something for Oklahoma. K-State not going to be necessarily in its best position, but the game's in Manhattan, Kansas. I mean, it's a 10.5-point line as of the time we're recording this. Any chance that K-State's able to sit there and pull one out?
Yeah, I mean, they've done it the last 2 years. It's going to be really hard if Skylar Thompson doesn't play at quarterback and they can't get that running game going and they don't get the turnovers that Spencer Rattler has been bothered with early in the season, and that kind of just, like I said, skittish offense at Oklahoma. I do think the Sooners are kind of sitting on that big game, though. where all it takes is one blowout, where if they come out here, blow out K-State by 30 points, and do it in a way that we're used to seeing their offense, that they're kind of sitting in a decent position as long as they keep winning. I think Ohio State and Oklahoma are in the same boat in a lot of ways because they're not what we expect. But with Oklahoma, it's the offense, and Ohio State's the defense. And they're going to continue to be propped up against each other all year.
Last question. I appreciate you joining me here. I'm not going to ask you to pick winners outright, but we're going to see a couple of top 10 losses just because of top 10 versus top 10. When we get to the end of Saturday, once Pac-12 After Dark and all those are done, are we going to be looking back at a weekend, in your opinion, where we're going to see absolute mayhem in terms of ranked teams, or are we going to see, maybe some teams getting pushed, but, on to the next week?
Well, I posed it out there as like, can you imagine a world where Kentucky beats Florida for the first time since 1986 and Arkansas beats Georgia and Ole Miss beats Alabama? The SEC would be in a state of total chaos. And that would really mean this season is for real in terms of the chaos. But I think Alabama and Georgia will get pushed to some extent and they'll come through. Like I said, I like Notre Dame to beat Cincinnati, and I think that's a big one there. And it'll feel fun, but we're still going to have that status quo, a bunch of teams that win. But I do like a couple upsets out there. Like I said, Notre Dame's one, and I'm trying to think the other one I picked this week. There was a couple others out there that they're going to happen, but they're not those seismic major upsets.
Well, you can check out all of Bill Bender's stuff over at the Sporting News, and good friend of mine. I'm happy that I was able to catch you in between youth coaching appearances. I can never get you to go out for a drink because Coach Bender is always in demand.
I can't get over to combustion. I'm always on a field every night, and then if I show up there, some of these parents might want me fired. So I feel these college coaches now. I get it when you have a bad game that you want to go into hiding a little bit. But we'll do that soon, Kevin. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. I want to thank you all for watching. Once again, this is the Big Me Kickoff, and we'll talk to you again next week.